Here, could not, as you can tell by my festive coat, and pretty excited to be part of this one. We're waiting for a few more to log in, so I'm just gonna let it load a little longer. Waiting to get David up on camera here too before I take it away. Okay, I am gonna get going. Just there's still people loading in. So if you're just joining now, we wanted to get started at the top of the hour. Could not be more excited to have David Coletto from Abacus Data back. Again, I encourage you to read the bio if you haven't in the ad. So I'm not going to go through all the stuff, but I always get giddy because it's always an honor to share this time with such experienced and interesting people. I'm just going to flat out say it. David is the CEO of Abacus Data. They're Canada's leading corporation, or one of Canada's leading corporations for advocacy groups and political leaders. They run a research firm that can help your business respond to unprecedented threats of generational change and technological disruption. They engage with Canadian millennials. Those of you that don't know what millennials are, born after 1980. Obviously, there's a lot of other groups we talk about as well. This is one that's really important to me, evidence-based strategies. So, today is the outcome of a survey. So these are people being asked questions. So we are relaying data to you. We're not talking about opinions or feelings. We're talking about data. And again, just one more little plug for David, who has his doctorate in political science from the University of Calgary. I know when you see his face, you're like, really? He seems pretty young, but really impressive. Also, his research on Canadian elections and political parties has also been cited in the Globe and Mail, National Post, Toronto Star. There's probably others, but has changed the game. And we are so honored to get to work with him. And I also just want to note before we get going, Upfield and Light Life as sponsors today, kind of making this able to happen. If you actually look below, you gotta promise. I know you hear this a lot. Gotta promise me you'll check out their website. You can see it in the slide there. There is really cool stuff in there. If you're not following some of this stuff online, again, reach out to our teams. But these websites alone are great resources. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. David Coletto. Oh, mute.
There we go. Thanks a lot, Kevin, and I appreciate that intro. And it's been a pleasure always to work with the great team at Cisco, who really excited to learn new things and share it, which is what this webinar is all about. And obviously to the sponsors of this, Light Life and Upfield Professional, thanks for supporting this and the work that we're doing. So this all starts for me in terms of, I got to put my bias on the table. First, Kevin said I look way younger than I am. For those of you who haven't seen me present before, I'm turning 38 next week. I know I look like I can barely consume alcohol in most provinces, but I'm much older. I'm an old millennial. But I do have to put my bias on the table. We're exploring the question of plant-based diets, the rise of meatless alternatives. I am a meat eater. I enjoy eating meat. And so that's my bias as I come into this. But it's an interesting question. And it really, for me, started earlier this year when one of the companies that makes these kinds of products started to trade their shares publicly. And within a few short months, that company, which initially offered its shares at $25 US, within a few months, it soared to $235, representing an 840% gain. Now it's come back to earth. It's now trading about $75, but still a 3 times increase. What does that tell us? Well, first it tells us that investors, those investing in this company and others like them, believe that there is a market for these meatless alternatives, that the consumer preferences are changing, and that the opportunity to sell these types of products to a changing consumer changing consumer preferences is significant, right? Other studies, this was a report that came out of Barclays out of the UK that estimated that the alternative meat sector could be worth upwards of $140 billion. And we've seen, like Maple Leaf Foods with their Light Life products, Tim Hortons carrying the Beyond the Meat, plant-based sausage patty, or even recently Kentucky Fried Chicken coming out and saying they're test driving a chickenless chicken product. So lots of interest in this, and lots of food service providers, retailers, and producers of products thinking about how this consumer market's shifting and trying to react to it. So that's really what I'm here to do today, is to provide some perspective and some new data on, if you are a food service provider, if you are a retailer, if you are just an interested spectator, where's this market going and what does it mean? So I'm really looking at a question that formed this research, and that is, are we about to enter, or have we entered, a meatless revolution, a substantial shift in consumer preferences that are going to change the way Canadians are eating, Americans are eating and others around the world? Or is this simply a temporary fad? Is it going to be a blip, and that $140 billion estimate won't come to fruition? They don't always do. And so that's a really important question. So what I can do as a market researcher is not predict the future. I wish I had that power. I don't. But what I can do is look at the data and start to anticipate, if it does happen, what might cause it? If it is starting to happen, do we have any evidence of it? And that's really what I endeavored to do in this study. So let me get into some of this data. So
David, I just want to jump in for 1 sec.
Yeah,
just want to jump in 1 second there. Your last slide there, I want to focus on the question mark. Folks, if you got questions as we go here, try to focus on the far right, the webinar chat section, and we'll try. Again, I want to let David go through his stuff, but please keep the questions flowing, and I'll do my best to collect them and gather them sort of along the way. Sorry to interrupt, Dave.
No worries. That's great. And yeah, I encourage you to ask questions. We'll have time at the end to sort of go through as many of those as we can. And so as I look at the talk today, 3 or 4 things I'd like to explore. One is, what is the market for meatless alternative products in Canada? How do we measure it? How confident are we that it's real and it's going to potentially get bigger or smaller over time? Why? And I think the most important question is why? Why are, as I'm going to show you, an increasing number of Canadians saying they have reduced the amount of meat or even dairy or alternate animal-based products? Why are they reducing their consumption? Or more important, why are they considering reducing? And they haven't done it yet, but they've thought about it. What's driving them? And we're going to focus on a number of factors that have been identified in other studies or in the media, and that is looking at the role that health plays in all of this, affordability, ethical choices, and climate change in the environment. And I think that those latter two, climate change and ethical decision-making, are particularly important, I think, to understanding shifts among, as Kevin said, those pesky millennials, that younger, large demographic who are, forcing a whole bunch of change in the restaurant and hospitality sector and the food service sector because of just the size of their spend. So I'm going to look at those 3 angles. And then at the end, I'm going to say, what does this all mean? And I'm going to try to give you some insight. Again, I'm not going to be able to predict what happens, but I think the data is pretty compelling in terms of telling us where things might go. So where did we get this data? We completed, this is as fresh data as you can get. We completed at the end of November, interviewing 2,000 Canadian adults. We conducted this survey online. It's a representative sample. So we've got coast to coast to coast, all age groups, genders, education, income, you name it. It's an exact replica, as much as we can, of the Canadian population, of the adult consumer group. And it's the same methodology, and I'm going to do a little plug for ourselves, that we used in the recent federal election, and we were one of the most accurate pollsters. So I've got confidence that this is a reflection of what the Canadian consumers thinking. Now, if you've got any viewers on today from the US or Europe or elsewhere, or do business in those markets, I suspect we will see a lot of similarities. Maybe not exactly the same kind of numbers, but same kinds of trends and thinking among American consumers, among those in the UK or in other parts of Europe. So I think the conclusions likely extend beyond the Canadian border as well. And so the question is, let's start, what is the market for meatless alternatives. And when I say meatless alternatives, we can talk about primarily unprocessed or unchanged, plant-based products like simple, like pulses or beans or other proteins that may be available to people who don't want to consume meat or say dairy products. But there's also, as we said, and like Maple Leaf Foods is producing one of those variations, is products that look like meat that are meant to supplant meat and yet are completely plant-based. And so what is the market for these kinds of products? And we start with intentions and behavior. And so we asked respondents in the past year, have you reduced the amount of meat you've been eating? Have you considered reducing the amount of meat you'd be eating? Have you not changed your behavior? Have you not even thought about it? Or have you started eating more meat? What we find is a sizable percentage of the country, over half, 51%, say they've either reduced the amount of meat they are eating from last year, or they have considered doing it but haven't done it yet or decided not to do it. And so that's a sizable number. Right there, you've got half the country. If we estimate there's about 29.5 million adult Canadians over the age of 18, that's a lot, right? And that's almost 15 million people who have at least either reduced, and we don't know to what extent, just any reduction is a shift in the marketplace, or have thought about it. If we expand that to look at all animal-based products, we include dairy and other, dairy is primarily the other main animal-based product, you can see that shifts in behavior, reported behavior, are lower. So 21% report reducing other animal-based products, but another 20% have considered doing so. So this points to at least an inclination, an intention to shift behavior, and this is the starting point to understanding the potential market. Now, we asked a very direct question. We said, before I get to that, 42% also believe, this is a surrounding impression, that they should probably be eating less meat than they do now, right? So that 42% plus the 51% that are considering it or already have reduced is another way of looking at this potential market. So a lot of consumers out there are at least thinking about it. Interestingly, though, when we ask people, do you eat too much meat now? Or do you eat enough or too little? The percentage of consumers who say they eat too much meat or too much dairy isn't as high as these numbers. So it is a difference between believing they eat too much. And often when we use the term too much, it means because it's unhealthy or it's not as healthy as it should be, as opposed to other reasons why. And you'll see that in a moment when I get into understanding those forces. It is important to note that the primary driver for why people are not eating as much meat perhaps as they once were, considering it has nothing really to do about the taste of the product. In fact, in our study, we had lots of evidence to suggest, for example, that 90% of Canadian adults agree they love the taste of meat. There's a lot of evidence out there that says it's not about the taste. Actually, the taste is what's probably keeping more people consuming this product than otherwise would, the way it makes them feel, how satisfied they feel. There's a lot I'll show you later when we compare meat products versus meatless products. It makes people happy, right? So there's an emotional connection to this product that means there is going to be a lag or some delay or some friction. If somebody may think they should reduce the amount of meat they eat, there's reasons they don't want to, and the taste is a primary one for those that are sticking to this product. But when we do ask the question, how likely are you to purchase meatless products that look like meat or are meant to replace meat but are 100% plant-based, we find that 8% of the market right now says they are certain to buy these kinds of products, whether in a retailer or in a food service provider, but another 34% say they are likely to. So you put these two numbers together and you get to that similar magic number of 42%, and there's another indication of the potential. And this gap between certain and likely, to me as a market researcher, is a really important one because it indicates some trepidation, some doubt that we wanted to explore. So we did that, and I'll show you some results a little bit later about some of the questions I think people have about these alternative products that they are asking as they make these choices going forward. Now, one of the things you're going to see throughout my presentation, and as Kevin said, we spend a lot of time thinking about generational change in the questions around food generally. I was here about a year ago talking about third-party apps and restaurants, right? That was the first webinar we did with Cisco, and it showed big generational gaps on technology use and how people order food to their home. But we see similar generational gaps on questions around diet, right? And on the likelihood here to purchase a meatless alternative product. If you are under the age of 45, about half say they are either certain or likely to purchase one of these products. If you are over 45, still substantial, a third, but substantially less than those who are under 45. So a big gap in this, and this millennial market, these under 45s, which includes some younger Gen Xers, are really important to watch because throughout this study, we see big gaps in not only their expectations, their perceptions, but also their intended behavior. So
hey, David, real quick, your mouse is jumping around a little bit.
I'm sorry.
I thought it was kind of laser pointer-ish, but then it stopped moving, and then I sounded kind of silly. Right. Okay, sorry to bug you.
No worries. That's good. Thanks. So that's the market. So then the question is, what is driving a shift away from this? And there's lots of hypotheses, right? In that Barclays report that estimated there's a $140 billion market out there, they identified a number that they felt would be driving this: health consciousness, climate change, concerns about treatment of animals, some reputational issues. And so we wanted to explore those and understand what was driving people, for example, away from meat. And we asked an open-ended question. What is the main reason for those who say they have reduced the amount of meat they've eaten in the past year? What's the primary reason you did that? And you can see here that for about half of the market who have reduced the amount that they eat, health reasons is the number one choice, that they've identified, that they feel that it's healthier to eat less meat, that they're concerned about their health. And so that's a big driver. Cost, affordability, on some types of meat products. And that's the other thing to note. We were talking generically about meat. There is a difference between chicken and pork and beef and lamb and all the different options that we have in terms of price and healthiness and all those kinds of things. But affordability is a big driver. We've done other work that shows this is increasingly an important consideration. People are feeling a squeeze in their household budgets. And so cost is a driver for 1 out of 5 people who say they've reduced the amount of meat they eat. 2 other factors though. 12% say ethics, the treatment of animals was the main reason. Again, unprompted. We didn't ask them or show them any options. This is what they said without any initial sort of prompt or stimulus. 11% said climate change or the environment. So 1 out of 5, or almost a quarter of those who reduced meat, have identified a reason other than health and other than cost that's changing their behavior. And I think if we had gone back, say 20 or 30 years ago and we did a similar study, we may have found people reducing the amount of meat they eat, but it wouldn't have been likely because of certainly not climate change or environmental reasons, and probably less about ethics, although there was some ethical, vegetarian and veganism that grew out even 20 or 30 years ago. They would have been primarily about health or cost. What we also did though is we gave them a list, and we said to all of those who would either have reduced or would consider reducing the amount of meat they eat, what considerations would drive them? And they could say it's a major consideration, a minor consideration, or not a consideration. So these numbers on your screen represent the percentage of those consumers who said these were a major consideration in their decision either to reduce meat or to consider reducing the amount of meat they eat. And you can see it's a similar pattern. Health at the top, animal treatment not far behind, 32% say it's a major consideration. Affordability, it makes them feel better, which is similar to health, but I think a different way of framing and talking about why people are eating less meat. Lowering their carbon footprint at 22% because a doctor told them, right? So don't discount the importance of influencers in people's lives. Because there's more choice available now, right? As your choice increases of meatless or plant-based alternatives, that allows people to make the shift or to reduce the amount of meat they're eating. And then last, you can see they don't like the taste, which was low on that list and aligns with that previous data. But among those who said they have reduced meat, you can see these percentages grow, right? They've made that choice already. And so when we asked them what drove their decision, health was number one, but animal treatment, lower carbon footprint rises up, and then affordability, more choice, which is a big driver, which means there was probably a sizable group of this market who until recently may have wanted to reduce the amount of meat that they wanted to eat, but didn't have an alternative choice, right? So the emergence of these alternatives into the market has allowed people to do something they maybe wanted to do but couldn't before they did, which is an important indicator. It's almost like if you build it, they will come. That's I think what this data is telling us. So when we look at the broad range, right? Health, I think, is an obvious one. It's something that we continue to talk about. The changes to the food guide, I think, are important in terms of starting to get people to reflect on what they eat. I think affordability will always be a factor, particularly if meat, and particularly beef, continues to rise in price. But it's the two on ethics and climate that I want to really spend more time on, because what we find in our research is that younger consumer is much more likely to say that they either cut out meat completely, or are considering reducing meat because of those two factors, right? And so for older consumers, health consciousness is the primary driver. They're less concerned about climate change. They're less concerned about the treatment of animals. But if you're under the age of 45, it's a much more balanced and different factors that are driving those behaviors. And so we take a step back and we look at climate change as an example. In this survey, we asked people, how often do you just think about climate change? And 18% of Canadians, or about 1 out of 5, say they think about climate change all the time. If you add in the category regularly, that number grows to almost 40%. So a sizable number of Canadians are reporting to me that they think about this issue all the time. And so if you're thinking about it all the time, well, guess what? So too will your desire for what I call a carbon neutral diet, right? So one of the things to watch for, and we've done a lot of research in terms of public opinion, public attitudes around climate change, it has intensified over the last 5 years. And that intensity has gone across the board, regardless of what age you are or where you live in the country. It's not universal, it's not 100%, but it's certainly up to where it was. And so as concern about climate change grows, and it's likely to happen, right? As more evidence of it happening appears in our day-to-day lives, so too will that impetus to change our diets if there is a belief that that change will mean a lower carbon footprint, right? So there's a message here for those that are in the dairy or meat production side of the business, that being able to demonstrate that you've reduced your own carbon footprint will be important over time, because more and more consumers are going to be thinking about these things.
David, I just wanted to jump in there, just talking about that carbon neutral part. A shout out, obviously, to Maple Leaf, who in November announced that move of being carbon neutral. And so, we're hearing more and more of this in the industry. So I just wanted to pop that in there for some of the support on this webinar.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. You're seeing producers like and Maple Leaf is the leader on this now, being first really out there to say that they're making all their operations carbon neutral, not just those that are in the plant-based side. So it's a really important point, and it's what consumers are demanding increasingly. I think it aligns. So
and being big often makes that difficult. So it's I think it's actually a more bolder thing than people even realize.
Yeah, and being big though also means you can have a bigger impact. So it kind of works both ways. Yeah, absolutely.
You bet.
So the point here though, from a consumer perspective, is I estimate that if you take the 29.5 million or so adult Canadians out there who are thinking about their choices every day, I estimate there's about 1.5 million today that are reducing their meat consumption primarily because of climate change. So it's not all of them. It's not even a majority of them yet, but 1.5 already are making that choice. And so you think about, as that group grows, what influence are they going to have on other people's choices as they spread the word, right? It's something to think about. And for me as a market researcher, the influence that others have on others' behavior is both fascinating and really important to understand. And so this trend may only be starting and that wave is building as opposed to it already in progress. So shifting gears slightly, one of the things we did in this survey, it was a pretty extensive survey, and so I can't share everything we did because I don't have enough time, but one of the interesting things we did is, and it's a hypothetical, and it wasn't in market, it wasn't, this wasn't a consumer sitting in a restaurant or looking at a store shelf, but we said, imagine you had on a menu a meat option or a meatless option that had a meat alternative product, right? And you had the choice between ordering those two. We then asked them to think about which of these two choices do you think would be, for example, more affordable, make you happier, would satisfy your hunger better, is better for the environment, and healthier, for example? And so what we did here is just a graphic to show where meat versus their alternatives fall on this. And what's important to note, and this is all of consumers, not just those who've reduced. When we look at those who have reduced, you start to see shifts. So it means, as those in the market trying to convince more and more consumers to change their behavior, moving some of those on the left of your screen, that better category: taste, happiness, natural, so less processed, satisfying hunger, cost. These are perceptions. And right now, more consumers believe that the meat item on that menu will be better on those things, that it will taste better, that it will make them happier, it will be more natural, right? Perception, not necessarily reality, but in my world, perception is as good as reality in many cases. On the alternative side, it wins on environmental impact, right? Far more people believe that the alternative meat products will be better for the environment than that meat product. The thing that's fascinating, though, and is a debate that I know is happening in the market and I think is reflected in this data, when we ask them, which of these two options do you believe, not knowing what the product was or what kind of meat we're talking about, which do you think would be, generally speaking, better for you from a health perspective? And here we find almost no difference. A third think that meat would be healthier, a third think the meat alternative would be healthier, and a third say they both be as healthy, equally healthy. And so that reflects, I think, a debate and a discussion that's going on around kitchen tables, around certainly boardroom tables, about what is healthier, is it not, and what claims are alternative meat products making, and whether consumers are truly believing them. And so what we wanted to know, as sort of the final piece of this research, is what questions do consumers likely have out there, right? As they look at your menus, as they look at your store shelves, as they're anticipating buying products that you might be producing, what is it that they want? And so the way that we did this is we asked a question. We said, when it comes to plant-based products like that look and taste like meat, but are made with plants, like Beyond Meat as an example, just so people could understand, how much confidence do you have that these products are each of the following? And we gave them a bunch of attributes to test their confidence level at. And so these are the percentage of people who said they are confident, completely or almost entirely confident, that these products, these alternatives, are safe to eat, they produce a smaller footprint, they're healthier than meat, and they're less expensive than meat. And the point here is first that these numbers are relatively low, meaning there are some doubt in a lot of consumers' minds. There's very few consumers who say, I have no confidence that any of these claims that may be out there are not true, but I'm not completely confident about them either. Now, we also live, we should keep in mind, in the post-truth world to begin with. And so much of what we see, we now put an asterisk beside and we say, well, I saw something claiming this and I'm just not sure it's true. And that's going to be the norm as opposed to the exception these days. But it does reflect, I think, the debate and the challenge that those who are offering meatless alternatives, those who are producing them, and on the flip side, those, and there's a competition out there, those who don't want consumers to eat more of these products. What is the debate going on? So is it safe to eat? Does it actually produce less carbon? Is it healthier for me? You can see only 26% of consumers are confident, absolutely confident, that these meatless alternatives are healthier. And then the question around affordability is unclear as well. So there remains a lot of, not necessarily doubt, but questions about what these products are. And you have to keep in mind, they're really new in the first place. And so there's still lots to learn from a consumer perspective.
And I wanted to jump in there, David, too, like a lot that they've come up already in the hot topic in our culinary center right now is around the ingredients, as people are now starting to see those infographics and starting to dial into that. So yes, on top of that safe to eat, now people are like, okay, well, overall is it, but then it's like, what about the ingredients in these products, right? So,
and how processed are they? And people looking for more natural diets, there's a lot to mix in there, right? And it's complicated and
there's not necessarily, exactly. We got to do
no
more
easy answer here, but I think this data reflects, I think, what the state of mind is of that consumer. So this is among people who have already reduced their meat consumption, right? So the same question, and you can see more confidence. And so what this reflects is as opposed to the affordability, everything else is higher. And that tells me that those who have already started to reduce their meat consumption, who may already be eating some of these alternatives, they're more convinced, right, that they are safe to eat, that what's inside them, that there's a smaller footprint. So as this happens, and as companies like Maple Leaf Foods and their competitors out there are marketing these products to consumers, and as, for example, Cisco offers more alternatives to you to sort of stock your kitchens with, I think more consumers will gravitate towards that, right? But the first step is wanting to change your behavior. And as I've shown you at the beginning, there's a lot of Canadians out there who are looking to do that. And so that means there's going to be a demand for these options. The last thing I want to talk about is psychology. And as someone who is fascinated by why we do what we do, I'm increasingly convinced that a lot of why we do what we do has nothing to do with logic, has sometimes nothing to do with even deep emotion, but is driven by what other people think about us, right? And this peer pressure, this social pressure that we're put under. And that's not a new thing. I think from the beginning of humankind, we've been, shaped and pushed to do things because of guilt or because of others sort of encouraging us to do it. So one of the questions we wanted to explore, because I used sort of the single-use plastic, right? And the sort of reaction to straws, single-use straws that happened about 1.5 years ago or 2 years ago now, in which you had a lot of food service providers moving quickly to get rid of the straws not because consumers, and they do care, but not just because consumers didn't want to see them, is because consumers were probably concerned about what it said about who they were. If they were carrying a container, say a drink from Tim Hortons or Starbucks that had a straw in it, right? And so that fear of being judged, that fear of being shamed is an important thing to explore. And so what we wanted to do is ask, have you ever been shamed or judged for eating meat? And you can see it's not a lot of people, 9% of Canadians. Now, if you extrapolate that again to the 29.5 million Canadians, that's 2.9, almost 3 million Canadians who say at some point they've been shamed for eating meat. But the fascinating gap is millennials versus everybody else. And this gives us insight into what might be happening in the marketplace as millennials are, and Gen Z who's coming after them, are increasingly concerned about climate change, increasingly questioning animal welfare, say on farms or in agriculture. And so they are, as much as they are very much more tolerant and progressive on many issues, they're also a little judgy. And there's a lot of millennials out there who say they've been judged for eating meat. And so that 16% is substantially higher than everybody else. So this is not widespread. But for me, this is a benchmark. And I'm curious to know whether this number goes up or does it go down? Because if it goes up, and it goes up quickly, that's when we reach a tipping point in which people don't want to be seen eating meat or eating animal-based products. They might be doing it in the comfort and quiet and privacy of their own home, but they may not want to do it in public. And why it matters, this was from the study we did last year with Cisco, where we looked at the food service sector and sort of how people behave. This shows how often do you see pictures of food on your Instagram account. And among everybody who has Instagram, it was about 30% say they see pictures of food on Instagram all the time, right? It's one of those pastimes of millennials, but everybody, we love taking pictures of the food we make or the food we're eating. It's part of that cultural experience now of eating. But look at the difference between millennials and everybody else. So why does this number matter? Because they are much more likely to see this stuff on their Instagram feed. They're much more likely to share. And so they will only share if they believe they won't be judged and people are going to see them in the right light. And so that's the importance of understanding how these broader attitudes shift into psychology and change people's behavior, not because they actually think that eating meat is less healthy or it's going to have any less impact on the environment. It's simply because other people will think less of them if they do it, and that's important. The last thing I want to highlight is just deep dive a little bit on millennials because I've highlighted it overall. And what we find among this cohort, and I'm going to focus on the younger cohort of millennials because they are particularly interesting and particularly different. And basically what I've shown you here is compared to everyone else in our survey, everyone else in the market, millennials are 9 points more likely to identify as vegetarian. They are 5 points more likely to identify as vegan. In our survey, about 4% of Canadians overall said they identify as a vegan. So that means millennials are close to 10% of millennials in our survey said they are, it would be closer to 7 are vegan. So much more likely to do that. They are 13 points more likely to believe that plant-based diets are healthier than those that have meat in them. They are 19 points, that's a huge gap, more likely to think that we need to change our diets because of climate change, right? That's that impetus to change. And 12% of millennials who have reduced their meat consumption have done so, 12% more likely, 12 points more likely, because of wanting to reduce their carbon footprint. So this cohort, this 18 to 29-year-olds, who, by the way, are also the most likely to be eating out, the most likely to be spending money in restaurants, whether quick service or fast casual or sitting down, they are going to be increasingly thinking about this and looking for options going forward. So let me wrap up and then we'll open up for some questions. The so what in all of this, I think a few points are worth noting. And by the way, we're going to have more of this data and more analysis up on our website after this webinar, and we'll make sure we share the link with Cisco to get it out to you. But the point here is, first, clear market for these products. There's a clear demand. A lot of people are reducing their meat consumption. Not very many are going full stop though, right? So we need to keep that in mind. I think that's a really important finding, is there's a large number of people, upwards of 75%, who agree that it would be very difficult for them to eliminate all meat or animal-based products from their diet, right? So this is not an impetus for a mass rush to veganism or vegetarianism, but it does suggest reduction, moderation, and a reflection, particularly among younger consumers, that the choices they make as consumers have an impact on the environment or on animal welfare. And so we are likely not only going to see a growing demand, I believe, for meatless products, but perhaps we're going to see a demand for products that are somewhat more hybrid, right? Half meat, half plant, or imagine burgers that only have half the meat as opposed to 100% beef. They're 50% beef and 50% pulses, right? Or chickpea or whatever it is you want to make. And so I do think that that is an opportunity as well for producers out there, for food service providers, to think about how do you augment your dishes? How do you augment your menu to create more options? As someone who works with a team who has 2 vegetarians on it, we often go out for team meals. And I am consistently struggling to find places that aren't completely vegetarian or vegan, but those that aren't having options that aren't just salad, right? Or a veggie burger. And so it's about thinking about how do you create interesting, tasty, affordable options for consumers that might not have a big steak in the middle of the plate, but allow them to get that protein that they're looking for. And that, I think, is, for me, the big takeaway of this, is that there's going to be a growing market, that the millennials are going to continue to push. And while health consciousness and affordability are still the primary drivers for why consumers might be shifting, climate change and ethical concerns are, I think, likely going to grow, because one of the things we learned is the biggest contributor to someone saying they want to reduce their meat or even dairy consumption among millennials is among those who want to know where their food comes from. And so as we become more interested in where our food comes from, I think we're going to also be much more interested and perhaps willing to shift our behavior as well. And so I focus on these 5 factors. They're what many people have pointed to. There's evidence in our survey that they are true, that these are the drivers that is shifting behavior. And it ultimately means, and I always end with a slide that says change, because change is inevitable and we all have to do it. But I think in the food business in particular, change is almost feels like it's not stopping, and there's so much of it going around. And the choices consumers want to make in terms of not how they eat or where they eat, but now what they eat is part of that in a big way. So thank you again for the chance to share, and for Cisco and the sponsors for putting this out there. And I will turn it back to Kevin to facilitate some conversations.
So really quick, I didn't want to jump in on you, but there actually is a flex burger that Cisco's created, working with a vendor of ours. So yes, there already is a product out there, half meat, half. Um, and then I also wanted to, I've been trying to make notes just so I'll wait because there's more questions coming in now. A lot of talk about the cost of meatless products, and versus and perception. So I just, before we jump into the question, I just want to state to everybody, because there was a lot about ingredients, things like that. We're going to do our best to speak to the data on this slide because we don't have data on that. So we'll do our best to kind of navigate around that, but this is really about the trends and where it's going. You'll see the next slide that David put on the screen. We have teams across Canada that are working people with this. It really, as you ingest this data, it's about sort of deciding where do you fit, where does it fit for you, and what products fit your menu for that, right? Because a lot of questions people are saying about those, which I see that come up here, are at least from data that I don't know is available, are opinion based, right? And so I think it's really important to follow the data, and yeah, like I said, we're going to do our best to stick to that today. So a little bit of talk around the cost of products. That's just a perceptual thing, right? David, what was the one stat there? 19%. I can't remember what that one was, but it was about cost more or would spend more.
So, I mean, yeah, let's unpack the cost a little bit, right? Like I think what we learned was people are shifting away from meat, they say, because of cost. That's one of the drivers. For not everybody, but particularly those, I think, that cost would be a bigger sensitivity. Those from lower socioeconomic households, that will be a bigger driver. But I think there's as many questions about whether the alternatives are more cost affordable or effective, right? And so there's a lot of doubt there. It doesn't mean that they can't be or they won't be, but I think people aren't sure. And so if cost is a key driver, then for those that are looking to offer the customer or the consumer that option, there's a segment who will be looking for a lower price point or at least an equivalent price point in order to capture them. But then there's others who may be shifting and being willing to pay a little bit more. And so you'll likely see over time, and I think you're already seeing this in the market, differences in terms of, I don't like to say quality, but in terms of the product levels and the price attached to them to serve those different markets that are going to be out in that space.
And if I could jump in here as well. Hi.
Welcome,
hello.
Jay Ashton, our business resource lead for Canada. Sorry I didn't give you a proper plug.
I got to jump in this conversation.
No, it's great.
First of all, I think we've got about quite a few people on the call today, and I wouldn't mind if you guys want to send across where you think specifically on menus, where you feel that the cost is substantial. Because one of the biggest things that we saw, and we see this with Light Life, and we saw it with our product and different things that we've done, is that burgers were a very safe place for us to play in when we introduced plant-based, right? So there's steaks out there. I saw a video today on creating a steak from plant-based products. All these different things are coming in the marketplace, but we started with burgers. What happened with the burger thing too is that a lot of our burger prices were already starting to hit the ceiling of pricing in the marketplaces across Canada. So as we introduced this new product, it wasn't that they were going to come in at that lower cost point, even if it is easier to produce if you're building it from scratch or you're purchasing a product that's pre-made, that they actually jumped in there. And then what happened, to David, what you were saying, is that demand part jumped in there as well. So we had high price products on burgers, because these are typically products that are going to fit into a casual dining establishment. It's not going to go into those burger shacks that are maybe lower end. And if they are in a burger shack that's a higher end, it's usually going to be at a higher price point, right? So it's not going to fit that area, which is typically where millennials will go anyways, right? So we see this high point, high demand, fitting the casual dining, media jumps on board. It's a perfect combination to create a higher price point on these products. Now, from my understanding, my lectures across Canada is that we'll probably start seeing, to your point, Dave, is that softening of that price point as we start seeing this become more mainstream into our diets, into our areas. And we're seeing that already with Costco bringing, I believe Light Life is coming into Costco and those different things like that, is that we're going to start seeing these price points start to soften as it becomes more mainstream in our diets and where we're going to see these products come in there. So,
and Jay, I also want to note, like when you talk about, we talked about the IPO originally and R&D, those things are also factored into cost of products. So the more, once companies get into a more profitable space with that, it just allows that to naturally happen with the available ingredients and all that too, right? So that also factors in.
And absolutely, and I think I just want to mention this also, and just thank everyone that was able to, that came into this presentation today. A lot of work went into it, and David's done an amazing job. And I do believe this is Canada's first data that's out there right now on the stats that David's pulled across Canada for our industry. So it's going to be very valuable as we dig into this more and more. But I think the thing is that you know, from Cisco's perspective, we're very neutral in this area as well as David is within the subject. But the thing is also is, to me, and I might be biased because I lead this amazing department, but this is exciting. And we need to look at this as an exciting perspective of our industry. It's just created a new area for our chefs and our customers and our consumers and Canadians to be able to get a new product onto a menu, into a new area, and really create some excitement where over the past few years, we haven't really saw this excitement and this energy coming into a new category for our chefs to play with. And to David, what you mentioned earlier regarding like social media, typically plant-based food's pretty, right? So it's typically not a lot of gravy, by the way. Not that there's a problem with gravy, but typically it's a higher color points in the images and within products like beets and stuff. You're going to get it where it's become social media worthy just based on the colors of it. And we all know that you have to take a picture of your food before you eat it, right? So it is important that we see that also pulling this trend. Environmental impacts are so big on this. The carbon footprint reduction, it's number 4 on the carbon footprint that we need to reduce is eat more than plant-based. So that is never in the history of, I've been in this industry 30 years, I've never seen us attach a movement in our industry to an environmental movement. That's why this isn't going away in my perspective. I could be wrong. But it is to me a very exciting conversation and area in our industry that's moving forward. And look at it as a bonus. It is really an additional new area for our customers to make money at, and also our consumers to have a new experience in our dining.
And I want to add in there too, in this space, you know, again, just some of the data, David, somebody had stated 142 billion. The questions that come out around sustainability, ingredients, all that, I think what's more important for people to focus on is where you are positioned as a restaurant. Because I think some people get hung up on, well, people are saying this and people are saying that. Well, again, we're speaking to data today. We're not speaking to what people are saying. And I think it's very important because we've had a lot of different people at our countertops. I think it's very important that you have to decide as a restaurant, and then as well as serving your own clientele, where products and where things fit for you, and not necessarily getting so hung up on that, right? Because you know, at the end of the day, sales are important. It's what drives our business. And to Jay's point, obviously, I honestly think it's awesome too that we're chasing this environmental cause down and connecting it. But I think it's very important to stick to data and not necessarily what we're hearing or people are saying. And not only that, but what David and his team have done on a national level is actually, and we can help, we've already been helping customers, that we can do on a smaller scale for your customer base to help you find out where this fits, and not so much what you think, but figuring out what people will actually buy and what they want. I hope that made sense. Did you hear that? Anybody?
Yeah. Our silence is agreement.
Okay, good.
We have a lot more questions here.
Okay, yes. Okay, so let's punch into a few more questions here because I don't want to miss any. Again, a lot of them are around, you know, millennials believe is their decisions based on science and education or assumption. Kind of talked about a little bit, you know, the data that shows an increase in plant-based product consumption, and then people asking about what about healthcare, right? So question where it's very incredibly diet and ingredient specific. And then questions around plant-based options, again, based on the other part, right? So do we want to unpack that a little bit? I mean, again, we don't necessarily have data on that. You guys?
I can just start on the assumptions versus fact piece, because I think it's important. And I don't think it's, isolated to millennials about what drives their perceptions or their behavior. I think increasingly we are, as I said, we are all putting that asterisk beside claims that anyone makes these days because we're just not sure and we don't know who to trust. And I think that there may be a pendulum coming back, and certain voices in our influence sphere have influence and can guide us. But I also think that, and that's why I started this by saying, is this a fad or is this a revolution or a trend? Because, fads are those built on falsehoods or something that's not solid and can be easily pushed away. I don't think that's the case. I think that these are people who increasingly believe that whether it's environmental issues, whether it's their health, whether it's their pocketbook, those factors are always going to be there going forward. And so, the claims that different sectors will make, as someone, and I admit I work with the dairy farmers of Canada, right? There's an environmental impact to producing a glass of milk. And so it's a choice that they're going to have to find a way to reduce that as consumer concern grows. But on the flip side, there's a lot of unknown about how much carbon does it cost to produce a glass of almond beverage, right? And so all of that stuff is going to be part of it. And so when I show that data on the lack, it's not a lack of confidence, it's a lack of certainty about some of the claims out there about meatless alternatives that are going to continue to be part of the conversation. And so it's just, I think it's part of it. And now you're going to have a consumer who is much more empowered than they've ever been. They have much more information, some of it false, some of it, half true, some of it real and important. And you just need to be I think you're all aware, those of you who are on the front lines and deal with customers every day, they're going to asking way more questions. And so you need to have answers. And I think that's the most important lesson I can offer in terms of what consumers want.
And David, I think you're right. And I think when you're out there making your choices, especially for either your parents that are in homes or for the healthcare and things like that, is get to the dietitians. They're the ones that know this stuff.
Yes.
Do your homework with them. They're going to provide you with the knowledge because we also understand that pulling stuff off the internet, there could be influencers that are giving some of that feedback and notions or ideas on the internet that may be false or maybe not untrue. So stick to your dietitians, learn from them, research it is. We do see some movements within this from the information that I've gathered over to on the healthcare side, that this is also going to evolve even more and more as we see healthcare. And I think the technology side too, when we see food that, when this movement came out, some of it was questionable on how it tastes, that is improving immensely, almost daily. And that's going to be important to those people that are in homes and healthcare because they want food that tastes good as well, right? So it's going to be important there as well as the frontline based consumers that are out there. We need to make sure that they're also getting that impact of the quality of food that restaurants want to have as well. So I do see that becoming a big part. Kevin, I do want to touch on one thing here. There's a question that came in, and it's interesting because I was just working on this the other day regarding the bridge between consumers wanting to know how their food is growing or relating to meat, and how do we bridge that? And for the restaurateurs that are on the call today and people that are out there, is I think the more we got to kind of back up in a sense is the more that we educate our frontline servers and our people in our restaurants, this creates an experience for them is when their food and they understand where their food comes from. They're telling their tables or their people that are out there and they're waiting on. And it could be subtleties, and it could be subtleties in your menu. It could be subtleties in your marketing, right? But this is where the millennials want to hear more about where their foods are coming from. And based on David's stats from the past is that we really need to focus on millennials and Gen Z where our business is going, right? That's the direction they're going. So we need to make sure that our servers and our people in our restaurants understand these things. So when you buy food that comes from a source that's treating the animals properly, or it is plant-based and they know it comes from this farmer or whatever the case is, the more that you can educate them, it creates an experience for those diners, right? And that's where we see as an experience economy that we live in today. All of our restaurants that are suffering, I would maybe look at your experience and really review that And the experience means you don't have to go to the table and they're juggling fruit. Is the experience that they're coming there and they're learning something about what they're eating. And it's so easy to do, right? And I truly believe when you look at this movement, this is a huge area for you guys, for our restaurateurs to capitalize on that. Educate your staff, staff educates the customer. It's a win-win. Again
though, educating with facts. Good plug from one of our dietitians that came in. So again, yeah, to try to educate with facts, not feelings and opinions, because that can be very dangerous data. I also, something came up about somebody saying about, hey, what are you seeing in increases in vegans? And I just want to do my best to quote a stat that we saw from Restaurants Canada, because I don't know what the increase is, but that space was around 7% in vegan. It might even have been a little lower, vegetarian being a little higher, and then 32% flexitarian. So people conscientiously choosing to eat less meat, and that was. So I just wanted to address that to folks on the call, because I think that's an important thing to note. Because again, yes, we're talking about this movement happening, but it's where does it fit, right? You to convert your whole menu over if your clientele, that's not the demand. I think it's important to know that.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, again, our data is in line with what you just said, Kevin, in terms of the percentage who identify and those who then report whether they eat meat or consume any animal products. We don't see a huge spike. It hasn't been, it's growing, and it's growing primarily from those younger generations. But, there isn't this wave of veganism starting. In fact, one of the interesting things I didn't share from our study, which is going to be on the website, is the word vegan itself brings with it some difficult at times connotations. In fact, we did an experiment in our survey where we said, when you see the term plant-based, we showed half the sample plant-based, and when we showed the other half of the sample vegan, and we said, do you get a positive or negative impression of that? How does it make you feel? The difference between plant-based and vegan was almost 15 to 20 points, which is real and substantial, meaning plant-based has more positive connotations than vegan. There's a particularly for those who aren't vegan and those who don't want to be judged or feel that sometimes vegans are a little judgy, that plant-based language unless you're targeting vegans and those who identify as vegans as your primary customer, I think there's a growing evidence, and our survey is just one point of it, that says maybe using the terminology plant-based gets you a wider audience as opposed to just the vegans who again they have a reputation now with some people that for some is positive and for others not, and it's not really a neutral term anymore.
And then, sorry, Jay, I just want to throw something in there about the lots of questions just generally, just a few seconds, David, on this. Just a lot of questions. Why didn't you ask this? Why didn't you do that? Just want everybody to understand that building a survey and variables and time is very complicated. So will we build something potentially coming up out of it? But maybe there's a more eloquent way to put that, David, but I just wanted to address that because a lot of questions came up. It's quite a complicated animal.
Yeah, and I think you did a good job. It's hard to ask, as I'm someone who wants to know everything, yet the average person who answers a survey will really only give me 15 minutes of their time and focus. So we went in this with a few research questions. It doesn't answer everything, and it doesn't possibly come to sort of give us insight into every aspect of this issue. But it's something that I think we're going to see more and more data come out of because this market is growing. There's an interest in understanding it. And so Abacus will continue to do it. We're excited to work with Cisco too to keep digging a little bit at different aspects of this.
Jay, did you have something there? I'm sorry, I felt like I interrupted.
I was just going to say, just on when we look at vegan on menus, right? In the past, we would put it you usually saw it probably about 10 years ago, is that we had a section that was for vegan diets or vegan food. And what happened is that we really encouraged people just to put that in their regular areas of the menu, right? We used to segregate it off. And what happened is that the value of those dishes actually started to go down. And, you'd ask a customer, like a restaurateur, how many of those is the veggie burgers? And they I hardly sell those things. Well, they were segregated off into those areas. And what people felt is that the less value, because when it came out, it really wasn't quality products, right? So it obviously has evolved today, but 10 years ago, it actually was segregated out there and felt less value, and people just didn't want to order those, right? So now that we put these into and I recommend even with the plant-based food and the dishes that you're creating, put it in your menu. Like put it in the regular side, put it with the other food. You can indicate if you want in the verbiage or in maybe a icon or whatever, but just finally put it in there so it doesn't lose the value. It gets the same respect as your steak does and all those other things, and you'll be able to capitalize on some of those price points. It's just be careful putting it over to the side or in a plant-based area. I think using the word plant-based to David's report is very important. I think the word flexitarian is also going to be very important. We're just, I think, at the edge of that to become mainstream as conversations, right? Michael J. Fox is a flexitarian. His wife is a flexitarian. Those things.
And Jay, in our survey, we asked that about a third of Canadians hadn't even heard of that term yet, right? So
exactly.
Which we're using like it's common speak right now. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that's okay. We can, because we need to be ahead of our consumers, right? In our industry, and that's okay. But I definitely think it's going to become more mainstream as we see softening, or as things starting to find where it's all going to fit in this movement, is that we'll start hearing the word flexitarian more and more in our common language when we go out to restaurants and things like that. So just might be ahead of the curve on the flexitarian stuff. Yeah.
So we are at time here. I apologize if I missed anything. A lot of questions I tried to bundle together in a few spots. Huge thanks to David Coletto and his team. A lot of work behind the scenes. You're too modest, but we really enjoy working with you. Like I said, I can't say this enough. It's just an honor. Just the way you speak, the way you build data, and what you're trying to do here. Again, speaking as you referred to the post, what do you call it? The post-fact era or whatever, which is like, man, like, I'm glad that we're at least addressing that now, you know. Thanks to Upfield and Light Life for making this possible. I know David and Abacus appreciate that. Thanks to Jay, Ashton, and again, my apologies, Dave, for not giving you a proper introduction when we started the dialogue here. It's appreciated. You do a lot of work behind the scenes. You get all this stuff going. Amazing things planned for webinars in 2020. That's right, everybody. End of a decade coming up. Get on it. Working on some panel discussions, that sort of thing. But keep your feedback coming to us. We look forward to working with David and his team again. Hopefully, Jay. I shouldn't say anything there. I don't want to make any promises I can't keep. And we can't thank all of you enough who joined us on this. Remember, people, we get that your heads are spinning. There's a lot of information here. Cisco has a team, you know, across the country. In the U.S., we have some peers. Hopefully, our Ireland folks are on here. There's a lot of resources to help you through this, and we're here to help, and we want to help you with this. And we're really appreciative of the support from everybody. Have a great New Year. Happy holidays, everybody. And thanks again, gents, for speaking, and again, everybody for their questions. Cisco
Thanks, Kevin.
Kevin, signing off.
Yeah, thank you.